Hey guys, welcome to RC Projects. A couple of weeks ago I did an unboxing video of my new soldering station by Tenma, and on that video I had a comment from RC Kid 288 in Canada. Hello there. And he wanted me to do a tutorial on how to solder a new battery connection, which is going to be today's video. I've got some Dean's connectors here, so I'm going to be soldering a new battery connection onto obviously my battery of choice, and I'm going to be soldering the new connection onto the drift car as well, because that's got a Tamiya connector. So I'm going to try and show you every step of how to solder a new battery connection, all the tips and tricks and all the useful hints and stuff like that, just to help you guys with your soldering. And if this video helps, then great. So yeah, I hope you find this video helpful, and we shall start now. First, we'll start off with what you need to solder. This is my solder here. It's a lead-free base solder, and it's quite thin, so it's easily melted on the soldering iron tip. I'll talk about why it's lead-free in a minute. And you're also going to need a soldering iron. This is mine by Tenma, and it's got a chiseled tip there, which is what I learned to solder with. I think it's an easier tip to solder with, but people have their own personal preference. And you're also going to need a wet sponge just here to clean the soldering iron tip with. It's very important that you do that. You're also going to need heat shrink to cover up the exposed solder you've just done. So this is it here, black and red, for positive and negative. You're also going to need your battery connections. I've got the Dean's ones here, but you've also got ones by Traxxas, you've got Uniplug, Tamiya connections, which I'm changing from. So I've got another bag there. These are really cheap. These are not official Dean's ones, but they work pretty well, and they're quite cheap as well. So yeah, that's what you're going to need to solder with, and we'll move on to what's going to help you out with soldering. Now this is stuff that you're not going to necessarily need, but will help you a lot when you're soldering. This is flux here. This was really cheap off eBay. You can get different kinds of flux. This is the one I got. It's like a paste. There you can see where I've done previous soldering and dipped the contact points in. So yeah, flux, it helps the solder flow. It gets quite messy, but if it's going to help you soldering, then it's definitely worth getting. And this is a helping hand here. I didn't have this when I was soldering previously, but it's got little clampy claws there to hold the wires and hold the battery connections to help you soldering, because you'll see how helpful that is later. And it's also got a magnifying glass here, so I'll try and show you the soldering through this, then you'll get a better close-up. You can see me in the camera there. Hello. So these things are going to help you out. They're not too expensive. This was £4 off eBay, and this was, I think, £1.21, so really cheap, and going to help you massively when you're soldering. Now comes the safety talk. There's two things to talk about here. This is the solder. It's lead free, which means any smoke that comes off the soldering is not safe, but it's okay to breathe in. If you've got a lead based solder, it's very poisonous to breathe it in, and if you don't know, human and lead don't go very well together. And the tip of the soldering iron gets very hot. I've got it set at 450 degrees C at the moment. It's not on, obviously that's why I can touch it, but it'll get very hot, and I've actually burnt myself on it a couple of weeks ago when I was doing the other battery connections. I don't know whether you can see this on my thumb, probably not. There's a slight red mark there. But yeah, that's where I burnt myself, and it's lasted 2 weeks and it still hasn't gone away yet. So yeah, just a few safety tips there. So the very first step when soldering new battery connections is to get rid of the old ones. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut mine off, but if you can actually desolder the connection you don't want, that's a lot better, because you can still keep the length of the wire. But I'm just choosing to do this because I don't want the wire to be that long anyway. It's in the drift car, so that's the old connection there. We'll get rid of that, and you'll be left with 2 points like that. So I'm going to attempt to show you this in the best way possible, but these are my wire strippers, and they strip the plastic coating from the outside of the wire. So you place it in there like that. These two arms clamp down like that. Give it a squeeze, and it pulls off the insulating wrap around the wire at the top there. So just twist that closed like that. We'll do the red one. So the same thing, you just get the wire grabbed like that, trying to do this on camera is quite difficult. You just squeeze it and it pulls off the insulating bit around the wire. And just twist them close. Do that so the wire doesn't splay out like that and cause you problems. So that's that one done. We also need to do it on the ESC. So same thing. Use your wire snips to cut the wires off. 1, 2. Try and get it as close to the battery as you can to get as much wire left as possible. And the same thing. It's going to be a bit more difficult, but just there. Squeeze and twist. And the black one. Put it in. Squeeze and twist. So that's the very first thing you need to do when you're soldering. As soon as you've clipped the old connections off, and as soon as the wires are like this, you need to put the heat shrink on. Very important, because you don't want to solder your new connection on, then have to get rid of it and put the heat shrink on. It's very important that you do that. I've forgotten many times. So that's my first top tip: put the heat shrink on before you do anything else. Because desoldering a brand new connection you've just made is very annoying. So there you go, that's the heat shrink on there, and just leave it. So the next thing you're going to want to do is to dip the points that you're contacting in the flux. Now this is very sticky stuff, it's not particularly pleasant, but it is going to help you solder. So it's best to use it. So you can see this is the Dean's connector here. You've got the longer bits here which are actually the contacts and where you connect them like that. So these are the bits you're going to be soldering here. These are the shorter bits. So all we need to do is just dunk them in and pull them out again. It just coats it in a layer of flux to help you solder. So I'll do this with the other one here. This is the female end. So just dunk them in the flux. And there you go. You also need to do this with the wires. So just dunk the wires in there. Both of them like that. That's them done. This is going to be a bit more difficult because these wires are shorter. But just dunk them in the flux. And the black one. Like that. All the points that you're soldering, just dunk in the flux. Now we're going to actually start soldering now. So the first thing you want to do is coat all the elements that you're soldering in a layer of solder. So I've got this is through the magnifying glass, you can see it there. And I shall get another point to show you. But the bits that you solder on the battery connection here, you can see there, this one's offset to the left, so you want to solder on the other side, on the right side, just here. So you've got the wire there doesn't bulge out of the connection there, if that makes any sense to you. And I like to solder on the underside there. It is a lot tighter to do, but it just keeps the two wires as close together as possible. With the heat shrink over, they won't short out, but I like to keep that on the inside there. But you can also solder on the outside there, it doesn't really matter, but on this one you need to solder on the right hand side. If that made any sense, I hope it did, and I hope that helps. But you can see the battery connection in the handy device here. So I'm going to try and get this shot right. Just there. So you get your soldering iron. It's just here. You can see the tip in there, and you just let the solder flow onto there, and you get quite a lot on there. See the smoke there, that's safe to breathe in because it's not a lead based solder. And all you do is just lay it on there. It'll heat up the point and should spread out. It's going to be very difficult to show you on camera. Just want to lay the solder on there. There you go, like that. So I've just got a nice lump of solder on there, on the contact point there. So you want to put some more solder on the tip there. I'm going to do the other one. It's going to be a bit more difficult with this one. If I just lay that flat. So what you're doing there is you're heating up the contact point with the flux. You're just letting the solder melt onto that contact point there. Like that. That's it. So I think this process is called tinning. This is what I was taught at school. Called tinning. So you're just coating the point you want to solder with not flux, with solder, like that. So you need to do this with all the other connections. That's called tinning, and you also need to do it to the wires as well. So clamp these into the helping hand there. Put one in one side, one in the other. It's the same process. You've obviously got the flux on the end there. So you get your soldering iron. Oh, we need to break off some more solder. So you clean your soldering tip, put some solder on, like that, and just let that just dab a little bit on either side. It doesn't have to be a lot, just needs to be a little bit. There you go, like that. So I'll show you the magnifying view when I do the ESC wires. You can also feed the solder in as you've got the tip on the end of the wire as well. That's another way to do it, which I'm doing now. It's a bit easier to do with the wires. There you go. Clean your soldering iron again. You can hear the hissing noise there. That's it being cleaned by the damp sponge. Always important to do that. That's one of the main things I was taught at school, was to always clean your soldering tip as often as you can. Right. That's a better shot. You can actually see the ends of the wire there. I just had to swizzle that around just to make sure that it was all nice and even. So solder on the tip again. You can just lay that onto the wire and the solder should just feed around. You can keep feeding a bit more solder in if you want. There you go. It's fine. That's all you need to do. You took the wire, just place the solder on. There you go. That's fed around. That's it. That's all you have to do. It's very simple. Clean your soldering tip. Put it back in the stand and just let them cool down. If you apply too much heat, it will start to melt the insulation around the wire. So just try and keep the contact with the tip and the wire as short as possible. That's those two done. Remove that. See if I can show you. So you can just see there a nice coating of solder all the way around the wire, like that. So that's the tinning process done. So now it's actually time to put the connections onto the end of the wires. So this is where your charger comes in really handy. I've already actually soldered previous connections there. You can see it just there. And my red wire goes to the bottom one, to the horizontal one, and my black wire goes to the vertical one. You need to check your charger to make sure which way around the positive and negative go, otherwise you'll damage your battery. But with this, your helping hand comes in really handy. So you put solder on the tip of the soldering iron. I need to do this with my right hand, but so you place the wire on the contact point there. You need solder on the iron to melt both bits of solder. It's going to be very difficult to show you on camera because I'm not right-handed, but you want to melt the solder on the contact point first, lay the wire immediately on, and then melt the solder on the wire. This may take a few takes. That's pretty good. There you go. So you can see there, there's a nice singular point there. Careful because this will still be hot. So just like that. So I need to do the other side now. try to show you in shot again. It's very, very difficult to do on camera. Need to feed that under there. That's there. Oh, this is tricky. So again, solder on the tip of the soldering iron. It melts the actual solder on the contact points a lot faster. You can see a good shot there. So hold the wire on there. Oh, I've just got a bit of solder on the battery bit there, no matter. So melt the solder on the battery. Oh, I'm shaking a bit. Like that, and then put that on, melt the solder on the wire. Hopefully that should have worked. Yeah. It's pretty good. I'll tidy it up in a minute. That's that wire connected. So I'll tidy those joints up and show you what to do next. It's always going to be difficult to show you on camera, but that's the ESC side done. So I've got some nice clean connections there. I'll show you how to do the heat shrink in a minute, but I'll do the battery connection next. So hopefully this should be the easier one, because those are quite short wires. These are quite long, so they're going to be easier to solder. Oh, that's not the right battery. That's the right battery. Just there. Okay, so we'll try the black one now. Got a good shot of it there. There. Red one was a lot more difficult to do, so I did that off camera. Got a fairly decent joint, very decent contact, so it's okay. So again, solder on the tip. You don't need much. Just like that. Remember, that smoke is safe to breathe in if you've got lead-free solder. This one's going to be tricky. Nope. Try that way. Okay. So melt the solder on that bit there. Place the wire over, melt the wire onto there. That didn't work. This is the most difficult thing to film, I think, to date. Because you've got loads of things in the way. Try that instead. See if this works better. Once you've made the connection, you can always tidy it up when you've finished. Just make sure you don't leave the solder on the contact on the battery connection too long, otherwise you'll start to melt it. I've done that a few times. I've made the connection, so I'm just going to tidy that up. Put a bit more solder around the sides so it's just nice and even all the way over, like the red one there. You can see a nice even distribution of solder over the contact point there. So I'll just tidy that up now. After you've soldered both of the battery connectors on and you're happy with them, now it's time to do the heat shrink. So I'll do the battery first. So once they've cooled down, slide over the heat shrink over the solder connection. One like that, and one like that. So it looks like that. Now you can use a lighter, or I've got some matches here. Yep. And just, you'll see the heat shrink start to shrink around those new joints you've just made. Ow, that's hot. The matches are a lot more difficult to use because they wear out a lot faster. But when you've got a joint that you're happy with, just leave it like that. You can also use the soldering iron. Get in there, just melt those, shrink those down. But it does make it look a lot messier. And you can see the heat shrink has shrank around those new joints there. And that's pretty much it. I'll just do the other one off camera, and then I'll show you just a few final bits to do. A few final things to do. Make sure before you turn your soldering iron off that the tip is clean. So I'm just going to put loads of solder on it. And then put it on there. Put more soldering on it. Put more solder on it. And just keep cleaning it in there until it's really nice and shiny. There's a good amount of solder on the tip. This will stop corrosion and make it ready to use next time. So it's nearly there. This is probably just because I used it for the heat shrink. It's got a bit of plastic on there, so I'm just cleaning that off now. It's nearly there. Bit more solder. You can just do this with the remaining little bits you've got left. It's nearly there. But as long as you keep the soldering tip clear and clean, it will last for ages. So very close. There you go, it's pretty much there. So you can see there, nice clean soldering tip to use for next time. And then you can just turn it off and just let it cool completely before you put it into storage for next time. And then another thing to do, which I like to do, is get some plaster dip. I've got some, here it is, plaster dip. And there's a screwdriver in here somewhere. So plaster dip in there. Get your new battery connections just here, and just put a nice thin layer of plaster dip around the base of the contacts, which you just soldered. Get a nice coating around there. Just if you're running in water, which the drift car's not going to be, but I'd like to do it just in case. It just stops any shorting out of the battery, and just leave that to dry. That's that one. I also do the ESC as well, just to make sure that it's not going to be shorting out on me. Just a nice thin coat all the way around, like that, and then just let that dry. So I'm going to tidy up and just end with a few little tips. So there you go, that's how to solder some new battery connections onto your RC, both from the ESC and the battery. Just a few little tips. Make sure the heat shrink is on the wire before you actually connect it to the battery connection. Make sure your soldering tip is always clean and always got solder on it before you solder anything. What else is there? Make sure you've got spare battery connections, just in case one of them goes wrong and melts, because I have done that on a few occasions. I think that's about it. The helping hand is a good tool to use, just to keep these in place. But yeah, I hope that you found this video helpful, and I tried to show it in the best way possible, but it is quite difficult to film when you're soldering. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you got any comments and feedback, leave them down below, as well as any soldering tips you have. This is the way I solder. I'm not saying it's the best way to solder, but it's the way I find the easiest, and it's the way I've been doing it for years. So yeah, hope you found this video helpful, and I'll see you next time on RC Projects.